All right, so this is a whirlwind travel through Slack. And what I'm talking about is how Slack facilitates and flattens communication hierarchies. Okay, and so I struggled with this term because originally I was looking at organizational hierarchies, but then I started thinking about what's really happening here. So I made a little shift a few days ago. The first thing we need to know about is that there are 3.9 billion email users currently on the planet. And so email is not going to go away anytime soon. So when we look at communication technologies that are used in organizations, the reports of email being killed are vastly exaggerated. In fact, as we can see here, we're looking at a 3% growth over the next 5 years in terms of the number of people who are actually using email. Now, here's a staggering figure right here. There are 2.32 billion monthly active users in Facebook. And as you can see, the trajectory here is pretty astonishing from 0.8 to 18 over a 10-year period. Facebook, as we all know, is huge, okay? All right? But even more so, let's look at Slack's growth over a 5-year period. As you can see, they've gone from 0 to 8 million active users. So it's pretty astonishing, and I'm arguing here that there's something really profound that's happening here that may have something to do with Slack, but also may have to do with online collaborative systems in general. Okay, so one of the things we have to think about in terms of messaging progression, and this is something I've noticed over the last few years, is that we're moving from phone calls to text messaging. And I have a friend who's a real estate agent, and he gets a lot more interactions now with his clients through text messaging than he does through phone calls. Another one is this is something that Facebook is struggling with, is a migration from Facebook to Instagram. Okay, so this is something that they're actually dealing with themselves. And then finally, the last one over here is inside of an organization, we are seeing organizations that adopt Slack are using a lot less email. They're moving away from using email. Now, why this is, of course, the big one is connectedness, and that's just simply what we have in our pockets, that we have cell phones in our pockets. We're constantly connected. We're constantly online. There's no time when we actually have any offline unless we're in the high Sierras, for instance, where there's no cell phone signal. We're seeing a migration from text voice to image text. Again, Instagram, for instance, and this is, again, part of the rise of the visual culture. And then finally, the influence of social media metaphors. In the process of using tools such as Facebook and things like that, the way that we actually think about how these environments should work shifts. So as an example, again, somebody has mentioned Discord, for instance, and that's another threaded discussion type of metaphor that sort of latches in. So it becomes another way that we communicate, but also it becomes an expectation in terms of how these systems should work. When we look at online collaborative systems, there are 3 different levels that we look at. One is individual, and it's not very collaborative at all. It's basically using a word processor. It's using a database or something like that. So there may be some sharing going on in terms of a shared database, but it's pretty low level. The next one is information sharing, which is what we more think about, which is things like email, video conferencing, data, network shares, for instance. And then finally, the final one is team dynamics. And this is a fundamental shift that we see in terms of how these teams are interacting. So it's no longer email, it's no longer a shared database, it's this conversational flow that we see happening that's combined with documents and things like that. So it becomes sort of this flow of information. When we look at online space, there are 4 facets of activity awareness that we have to think about. The first one is a common ground, and this is a communication protocol for testing and signaling shared knowledge and beliefs. So again, we look at something like a Discord channel. It's basically a group of like-minded people who are talking about a single subject. Okay? Communities of practice, a tacit understanding of community-specific behavior shared through enactment. Again, there are certain things that are considered appropriate inside of a Facebook, and there's some things that are not. Okay? So what happens, you have someone who you sort of know, and they start posting a lot of stuff about Trump. You may consider it to be inappropriate, and you may unfriend them. Okay? Or you can have a case where you have online communities, and people are basically kicked out of the community because they're doing things that basically piss everyone else off. Social capital, creation of persistent social goods through networks of mutually beneficial and satisfying interaction. Again, Facebook works because people interact with Facebook and create content, which becomes a snowball effect. It causes people to want to engage even more. And then finally, human development. And this is a very positive thing that we see in these kinds of environments, which is innovative behavior or decisions and trained by open-ended, complex problem solving. So what happens is, in the process of using these online tools, it elevates the skill set and knowledge that all of us have, which is one reason why we come back to this stuff. Okay, so here's a quote from Anil Dash. And this is sort of like the other side of the coin here, which is rather than shape the way we communicate, technology reflects our existing insecurities and behaviors. So when we talk about technology shaping certain types of communication, a flip side of that is the way that we use these technologies basically informs the kind of communications that we're going to have. So we have to sort of moderate what we see as a technology shaping communication against the way it's actually being utilized. And so here's my thesis statement. I'm doing something kind of unconventional, and then I'm putting my thesis in the middle of here instead of beginning, because I'm building a case here, and I want you to understand how I got to where I am right now. And that's public collaboration using social media tools can lead to a flattened organization. Okay, when we think about social media networking platforms, we're thinking about user-generated content. That's how these things actually work. We're thinking about flattened communication hierarchies. There's no boss of Facebook other than Mark Zuckerberg. Content is separate from the consumption method, and what that means is that, unlike a Word document, when you post to Facebook, it flows between your mobile device, your web browser, and also the Facebook app. So it's content, and then the way it's actually being represented are separate things. Content, digital enclosure contains user content. And Andrew Havik is talking about here is the idea that work product that we create is inside of a digital container and then it's monetized. Extensible platform through add-ons, and again, Facebook's applications, Google Drive, GitHub, integration, and Slack. Slack is very much focused on expanding their grasp of outside tools. Network effects fuel environment. The more people you have using a social environment, the more engaging and interesting it is. The more people you have building connections between each other, the more vibrant the community is. Okay? And then finally, the use of environmental generates social capital. Again, this idea that we use these environments because it generates social capital, and people are generating social capital inside this environment, so it becomes a positive feedback loop. Okay, here's an older platform. I looked at two different platforms in terms of talking about organizational communications. An older one is IBM Notes. It's been around since the 1990s, and it's a proprietary platform. You run it, you buy a Lotus Notes server, you set it up inside your organization, you own it. It's primarily calendaring and email, again, built in the 1990s. It's mostly a closed system. You can send email to and from the system, but things such as contact list, calendar, and things like that, these are all closed inside the environment. It has very weak social media integration. In your profile, you can put that you have a Twitter handle. Desktop, web, and then, in my opinion, has weak mobile support. You can do your email and your calendar on your mobile device, but that's basically it. And then finally, it's semi-porous because, again, what I mean by that is that email can come in and out of the system. So you can have external people outside of your organization still communicating with people inside your organization. Slack is platform agnostic. It just works on pretty much everything. It's cloud-based, okay, as all current technologies are. It's informed by social media conventions. So if you're using Facebook, you're using these other tools, you can use Slack. It's not externally porous. It's in a digital container. Channels public and private. Channels based on subject, not division. Okay, so it's not marketing. It's not like this. It's basically interest groups that basically do this. It's conversation based, and then again, it's extensible. Now, a model that we can look at that talks about a democratic type of environment is a holacracy. It's coined by Brian Robertson, and in this case, governance is explicitly spelled out in terms of like Facebook rules, in terms of engagement, in terms of how these things work. There's certain things you can do, certain things you can't do inside of Facebook. Children's games are clear roles and expectations are one way of looking at a holacracy. So in a hide and seek, you have one person who hides, other people are one person seeking, And so all the kids know exactly what the expectations are. In a holacracy, that's exactly the same way. It works the same way. Distributed authority position comes with both power and responsibility and indirectly fueled by digital communication. Am I out of time? Okay, so I'll leave it on this last slide. Yet as important as it having long, strong leaders can be for creativity, we've also found that groups of leaders taking turns tends to work even better. And this is a profound part of any social media environment. Okay, and this is why I'm saying these types of tools shift organizational communication. Okay, there's more, but I'm going to skip it. Thank you.
I'll ask a clarification question then as part of the, sorry. We have 10 minutes for discussion, so if you want to bring out points during the discussion time.
Boy, do I have points.
So just clarification question. So you are arguing that that this flattening of hierarchy is resulting in what?
Okay, a flattening communication is when we look at a holacracy, we're looking at a flattened, democratized organization, and I'm saying it exists because of digital communication. So there's a whole book that talks about it. And what struck me when I was reading this book, and the thing he doesn't actually go into, is that this thing couldn't have existed, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago. It's existing primarily because we have all these online communication tools that basically allow this person way over here to communicate with this person way over here, and they're able to pull resources. Somebody over in graphic design, someone over in marketing, someone over in product development, they suddenly say, hey, we're all thinking about the same sort of things. Let's get together. And in older environments, there may be silos that prevent these sorts of things from happening, but because of the way these online tools work, it creates these dynamic affinities that we see in these online spaces.
So are you focusing solely on the fact that technology is resulting in this? Are you looking at kind of the influence of technology and culture to result in this sort of?
Well, what I'm saying here is that these tools were not created in a vacuum. That they basically, what I'm talking about in terms of online social media, these are behaviors that we have. And so this is why these tools basically are so popular. It's because they're hooking into things that are innate in terms of the way that we like to work. I'm optimistic and say, for instance, that people like to collaborate and work. They like to share ideas. They like to share things that they find interesting with other people. Okay, so Slack allows you to do that. Okay.
So a lot of this reminds me. Makes me want to question: is this culture possible because of a startup-like culture where there's no structure? Because you spoke about how different group leaders come into place, and for social networking, there's no one person. It's different groups of people.
Yes, in fact, that's what holacracy is all about. It basically was developed by a guy that was a serial entrepreneur. He had done several startups, and he had seen how these startups actually work, and he said, we can formalize this process and turn it into something. So now what he does is actually, his company goes around and basically does workshops for companies that want to basically change the way they do their management structure. Some companies that have done this, for instance, one big one is Zappos, for instance. They are now in a holacracy in terms of having a distributed management model. People, even basically salespeople, people basically manning the phones can make significant changes in terms of business workflow based on points of friction they see inside of the environment. It's pretty awesome. I'm not completely drinking the Kool-Aid, by the way. It's sort of like using Marxist theory without being a Marxist. Does that make any sense? Okay, so I'm the same way with holacracy. I think he's on to some really great ideas, but I'm a little bit of a skeptic. I still think some hierarchies come into being just because they do.
It's really, I don't know, it seems It's like it's still too good to be true, or is it even possible? Wouldn't it cause more chaos? And like humans need structure.
You got to read the book. But the answer is he does address some of this in the book in terms of chaos, in terms of how these types of things work. And there's actually a governance structure that you basically enforce. A way of thinking of this is our Constitution and Bill of Rights. Okay, there are certain things that are delineated in terms of the things that we are able to do as citizens. There are certain things that we have the ability to do in terms of privilege. Okay, and in a holacracy, you do the same thing. You actually create a literal set of guidelines that everyone can come back to. Okay, these are not just shared knowledge. These things are actually literally written down. So everyone knows, and they can go back to this and say, I have the authority to be able to do this because this document is allowing me to have that authority. Okay? Again, have I drunk the Kool-Aid here? See, I share your skepticism, but I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from this particular model that we can then take to things that we do in terms of our own work groups, for instance. It may not be something that's shared by an entire company, but it could be something that's designed, that can work inside of a design department or a marketing department or a design and marketing department, where they basically decide we're going to share ideas. We're going to let authority shift. Again, this point right here feeds into that. This is something that we've all experienced, by the way, is that working in a group of people, who is the leader, sort of can shift over time, and people can step up and say, let me do this part over here. And we find that when we work in these kinds of environments, that the work that we're creating typically is a lot better. It's typically a lot better, and we're energized by the process.
In terms of the class, it's interesting to think about that idea of holacracy as a continuation of that kind of digital utopian flattening of hierarchy ideas that we see in the 60s.
It is.
There's been a lot of discontent in the way that's played out across the system. So it's interesting to think about other perspectives on how that might have manifested through tools.
Right.
Right, instead of like the internet in general.
Right. In fact, yeah, and Slack is a container, is a digital container. The Andrew Havik piece, by the way, is awesome because he also talks about digital surveillance and that you have a digital container, which means you're also being surveilled, and that's true in Slack. In fact, it's one of the negative aspects of Slack is there is a sense of surveillance in terms of the content you're creating, the expectation of engagement that you're going to have inside this environment, and that's a slide that comes later on at the very end of my presentation. If you would stay afterwards, I'll be happy to share. No. I practiced this thing several times, and I never could get exactly 10 minutes.
Well, that's why I wanted everyone to upload their slides too, so that we have access to each other's slides.
Sure. Yeah. I did a speed run on it, and I got to 10 minutes and 30 seconds, and that was like, but obviously, no, that's not going to happen when you present.
How many slides do you have left?
There's some stuff about Slack right here. This slide right here is talking about a flattened organization. We have a NCSU IT Slack instance on campus. It's got several channels. It's basically a pan-departmental Slack instance, and people are doing things like sharing information about stuff. In this case, there's a bunch of laptops the College of Education is going to get rid of. These laptops would normally go to surplus, and it would be handled, in my opinion, in a very inefficient manner. Instead, what these guys are saying is, hey, I've got these laptops. Does anybody want them? And so they go directly to departments. It saves the taxpayers money in the process of doing this. Okay, more slides. Blah, blah. My slide, my ex Slack. This was isn't that awesome? And then finally, this last slide here, and this is a really great quote from Castells. So, anyway.
You have 1 minute left.
I have 1 minute left. Woo! Okay. So, but anyway, this is a really awesome quote here because it sort of puts a twist on what I'm saying here, and that what he's talking about is that the tendency is to say the technology shaped the way we are communicating. This goes back to a slide I had earlier on, but that what we have to do is take a more balanced view and realize that these technologies facilitate certain types of things to take place, but is that new technology is not a sufficient but necessary condition for the kind of society that we live in. And again, the idea of a network society. So again, holacracy, for instance, as I said before, probably couldn't have existed like 30 years ago. But because we are living in a network society, it allows these things to happen. 20. Absolutely.